Morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Neil, and we've got some comments here in common, I think, so we'll maybe skip some of those. But thanks to Kelly and our team as well at Scotland Excel for inviting me. We actually hoped that George Clark, who's our brand ambassador, would turn up, but unfortunately you've got me, so please bear with me. I'm Ian Heron. I'm part of the residential heating team at Mitsubishi Electric. I'm the residential specification manager for Scotland, focusing on retrofit and new build with social housing organisations. I do look after private organisations as well. I've been at Mitsi for 8 years, and I'm going to talk briefly about how renewable heating technologies and the drive towards the electrification of heat can contribute to the net carbon plans that we have for the UK and particularly for Scotland. I'm going to look at some options and some examples of how we've used technology successfully over the years. And Mitsubishi themselves have been promoting heat pumps in the UK specifically for 14 years. I think it's true to say it's been a bit of a journey for ourselves and our clients. I recognise a few of the faces out here, so if I've pestered you over the years, apologies. Yeah, you know how it is. The challenge ahead is a big one. The Minister spoke earlier about the targets that we have. Certainly in June 19, UK was the first major economy to pass net zero emissions into law. The target means bringing all greenhouse gases to net zero by 2050 and going beyond the previous requirement against 1990 levels. And certainly it's a big milestone in tackling global warming. It's a step in the right direction, and obviously this target now has to be achieved, and there's an immediate need for widespread change across the whole economy, as stated by the IPCC. This move comes at a time increasing public pressure for the government to address UK's contribution to climate change, obviously, and having COP26 in Glasgow was, I think it was an honour for Scotland, and there were some very impressive projects exhibited at COP26. Heat pumps are one of the known technologies that feature heavily in the CCC's evaluation, as we'll see more of. And there's a number of drivers, and we're well aware of the challenge. In order to really accelerate the adoption of renewable low-carbon heating, it will certainly be legislation that will accelerate that growth. So it's been eight years at Mitsubishi. A lot of the projects that have moved forward have been about fuel poverty, and that's still one of the big drivers. But it clearly was going to be changes to the regulations and building regs that were going to ultimately push the whole market to move, particularly house builders in the new build market. In new build, for example, there's no need to install that you don't need to put a gas network in. Means that the cost to install heat pumps is very comparable to gas boilers already. Maybe slightly different in retrofit where there's more work to be done. But the new build growth plus the retrofit market will build the economies of scale that we really need to move forward to the next step. And the CCC projects a huge uplift in both new build and existing homes moving to heat pumps. This is both in off-gas grid areas, which, to be honest, up until now has been the main focus for retrofit. And there's been a number of large projects moving people out of fuel poverty, replacing storage heaters, solid fuel and oil. And it's going to be increasingly moving into on-gas grid areas, which has been a difficult market in terms of new technology to enter into. But it is changing. So why heat pumps? Well, this is a slide from the Heat Pump Association, and it shows that heat pumps can reduce carbon emissions compared to traditional forms of heating like oil, LPG, and natural gas, and direct electric. You can see the emissions here compared to a heat pump are considerably higher. In the past, because of, well, certainly on paper and because of the electrical network, it still wasn't possible for heat pumps to, contribute to a net zero carbon. But as the grid is getting much cleaner, particularly with wind and solar, and particularly in Scotland, it has to be said, we're ahead of the game. We've cleaned up the grid, and this is going to bring emissions down to what you see on the right-hand side of this graph, which is by 2050. The in terms of using heat pumps and the cleaner grid, will provide even lower carbon emissions and be a step towards net zero. In terms of sales in the UK, Neil mentioned earlier about the number of installs in Scotland. 2 years ago, sales of heat pumps were only about 35,000 units in the UK. And that's still relatively small if you compare that to gas boilers. But certainly, in order to decarbonise the heat supply, we're going to have to rapidly increase that. And the projection is the requirement will need to be about 1 million annual installs by the mid-2030s, which is quite some change. And at this rate, the deployment of around 19 million heat pumps recommended by the CCC to attain net zero by 2050 could be reached if we move forward with that programme. And again, in Scotland, we are at the forefront of that growth. Big part of that is government policy. There's no doubt about that. And projection of 600,000 heat pumps per year installed, and the aim to eliminate fossil fuels in new builds by 2024 and in 2025 in the rest of the UK. So as I say, I think we are pushing it forward in Scotland, which is is good to be involved in that. As we're all aware, the Heat and Building Strategy has been published, and it includes government investment of over £1.8 billion over the course of the Scottish Parliament. And this strategy should certainly help drive the transition and change required, aided by impending changes to the Scottish building regs. And, in terms of what we can expect in terms of that new build, and I know we're looking here at both retrofit and new build. Currently in Scotland, domestic heating and hot water falls into the Section 6 and 7 of the Scottish Building Standards, and it's moving now to the new build heat standard by 2024. And as I understand it, there will be an uplift in October, I believe it's going to happen, to the improved standard, which is essentially a 32% emissions reduction. And that's an interim uplift before the move in 2024. And looking at building regs compliance and SAP, and to me it's always been a bit of a black art, I think it still is, but Scotland will be moving to SAP 10 again within the next few months, as will England and Wales, and their move towards the future home standard that's what they're progressing to. So slightly different for us. And how are we doing so far? In Scotland, at the moment, it's only about around 4,000 households install low and net zero carbon heating each year, so it's relatively low. But having been in this sector for 8 years, it is dramatically increasing, and you can see the move, and it's happened over the last 18 months or so, particularly in new build, where the regs are beginning to change. On the retro side, it still continues to grow, although on retrofit, I think at the moment there's a little bit of a gap in terms of the funding. And with RHI no longer available, albeit there's a lot of good stuff going on with Home Energy Scotland, Energy Saving Trust, offering cash back and so on. But again, I think there is a bit of a gap, and you speak to a lot of social housing clients, and they want to do it, they want to move forward, but it's about the funding. So I think we do need to try and plug that gap as quickly as we can. Part of the plans to get installs moving, the Scottish Government has introduced the MCS certification scheme for heat pumps to incentivise companies to become accredited heat pump installers. And the hope is, obviously, we'll get traditional gas installers and contractors to reskill now and move forward. There's certainly a lot of really experienced and skilled installers of renewables and heat pumps exhibiting here today. And please, if you get the chance, go and speak to them. I know myself and my colleagues know a lot of them, and they do really good stuff. Overall, I think the expected step change can clearly be seen in this overview. There's a number of graphs been presented, but again, it shows the rapid growth in new build and retrofit, both on gas and into and off gas areas as well over the next 10 years. Now that's a projected growth. In terms of heat pumps, what are the likely to be the main options and what do they look like? Just going to focus on a couple of them. Ground source and air source heat pumps are two of the key options. They're also the option for hybrid heat pumps, exhaust air and others, and certainly they all play a part. And one size doesn't fit all. Certainly know that 8 years, it admits, there's not one solution to everything, but there is a solution, and heat pumps is going to play a major part in that. And one of the questions I'm still asked after 8 years, isn't it too cold in Scotland for a heat pump? I won't get into too much detail. It isn't. It's not actually that cold in most parts of Scotland, but heat pumps are effective, and we've got a lot of projects over Scotland that can show that. So in reality, when can you use a heat pump? They can be installed in many or most properties in Scotland. Obviously, it's a fabric-first approach. Get them upgraded, get acceptable insulation, get the construction and the envelope as tight as we possibly can. Good standard of glazing, reasonable air tightness, space for the heat pump, usually at the back of the property. And that's usually one of the big issues. Where do we put the outdoor unit? But again, with the heat pumps, have got a lot quieter, smaller, so they're usually an option. Also, space for a hot water cylinder if the heat pump's going to do hot water, which does make sense most of the time. So space for that in the properties. But this is certainly a typical local authority house. I was brought up in one very similar. This is in Lanarkshire. This is in Forth. It's a small village in Lanarkshire, where South Lanarkshire Council installed a number of heat pumps, a large number of heat pumps in off-gas areas. And that was the driver about that was fuel poverty. And, I came across that, elderly people paying £60 a week for storage heaters. So the question usually is, will I save money? It's not the main driver. We can't always say they will save money, but certainly what they will get is whole house heating, comfortable background heating, and heating that they can actually control is as close as you're going to get to a gas boiler in many situations. And we'll certainly get many installs around Scotland. Typical setup is here. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail. I'm sure some of you will have seen it. But this is a typical monoblock where all the refrigerant is in this outdoor box. And essentially, that's your new boiler. Try and demystify it. People are not that interested in actually what type of boiler they have, as long as it works, as long as they can pay for it. But in terms of demystifying heat pumps, it's a case of, that is now your boiler, if you like. And all it has is a flow and return water connection, an electrical connection. I'm not a heating engineer, and even I could install one at a push. And my colleague Craig will be laughing at that one when he's sitting up there. In new build, it is even easier because obviously you're starting from scratch, and you've got very thermally efficient buildings. And again, interesting, the lady mentioned about passive house earlier on. You're probably about 7 or 8 years ago and spoke to an architect who said, Ian, there'll be a lot of passive house. You'll only need a plasma TV to heat up the room. So which I thought was, at the time, didn't really fully understand, but I know where they're coming from now. And certainly heat pump technology will have to move to match that because, there's, in terms of heat demand, it's going to get lower. Hot water demand is still going to be quite high. But, new build is actually, it makes sense. It makes sense already. This is, in terms of the growth in private, new house builders, I can see the demand, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, really the new house builders were interested in technology, but, weren't really ready to even have a chat about it. But, a number of these house builders have introduced heat pumps, sometimes hybrid, and they are moving it along very quickly. And they can actually see the advantage of actually promoting renewable heating in the properties is a big plus. They can see that the consumer, the general public, are aware that they need to change. And certainly in social housing, we've got a lot of new builds and a lot of retro as well. Here's just some examples from the Hebrides through to the Highlands. There's award-winning projects here, and throughout Scotland into the Central Belt now. Many social housing new builds are working, have heat pumps working successfully, and there's a lot on the table that are moving forward with heat pumps. So it's interesting to see the growth. There will also be an increasing amount of heat networks. Neil mentioned this earlier, which will encourage the use of ground source heat pumps. Where externally you can use boreholes, or we can build in district heating and heat networks and use shared grounds in large private and social new build developments. So that will come. As to be said, district heating, communal heating has been more difficult to move along because of it's just a bit more technical. There's more to it. But again, you mentioned, we've got heat pumps using the Clyde as an energy source. That replicates what's been going on in London, where they're using the Thames, and elsewhere where heat pumps have been, more in advance to what we have here. But you can see it moving along. And it's really interesting stuff that's going on. And there's also other innovative projects that have been used and are moving along now. For example, in Glasgow, there's a very innovative use of heat pumps in Springburn, North Glasgow, where several multi-storey tower blocks have undergone massive improvements. And it's not just been to the heating, it's a really impressive project. If you get the chance, go and see that. You've got multiple air source heat pumps on the roof and on the ground in some of the buildings, and they provide whole house heating for hundreds of residents, and in many cases have cut heating costs by half. And a lot of the time they'll actually use the heating now, which they haven't done in the past. I think it's a tremendous achievement and a lot of commitment by the Housing Association and all concerned with that project. And I think it's important to look at opportunities this, if you like, new low-carbon revolution can offer to Scotland. And again, the Minister and my colleagues here on the stage have spoken about opportunities for Scottish businesses in manufacturing and skilled employment in Scotland. Myself, I was an apprentice engineer, served an apprenticeship and was made redundant in the early 80s and couldn't get back in the deindustrialisation of Scotland at the time. And you have to move on. And, we have, but I think there is a massive opportunity for training and getting youngsters and young people involved in renewable heating. So hopefully we can do that, and there can be, a new revolution and, in renewable energies. At Mitsubishi, we have a UK head office, but we've also got manufacturing facilities in Scotland, and we've developed those facilities over the years to ensure we're ready for the mass market growth in heat pumps. We employ 1,600 people at Livingston. There's a massive opportunity to train, as I say, installers and engineers across the country to enable this mass adoption of low-carbon technologies over the next 10, 20, 30 years, hopefully. And at Livingston, there's been a recent announcement of a 15 million investment in the manufacturing facility there with Scottish enterprise support, which significantly increases productivity, efficiency, and the R&D side of things. And these are R&D houses at the factory where we test everything for the UK and European demand, because this factory supplies the whole of Europe and the UK. And finally, I think to ensure that the public and consumers find it easy to transition to new technologies, because some of the technology is new. I think it's important that house builders, landlords and manufacturers provide the support and the backup to explain how the technology works and make it easy to use. For example, the best thing is the simplest controls that you can. Make it easy for people to follow. It doesn't need to be difficult. Clear instructions. And now more people want to be able to control their home systems through Wi-Fi, which you can do. And if you've got a problem, you can call up the manufacturer and they can diagnose the problems and hopefully sort them without sending an engineer out. So I think this user-friendly technology and increasing public awareness will allow us to adopt that. And again, there's going to be more, and other companies in the market are doing this. They're getting closer to the customer. They're doing marketing. Heat pumps have been on the TV, which is quite amazing compared to 8 years ago. So that will build up and hopefully enable acceptance of low-carbon technologies and make it easier to move toward these net zero carbon targets. I hope that's been reasonably interesting, and thanks for listening. And if you've got any questions, drop me an email. Happy to have a chat. Thanks very much. Thank you.